sick and full of anxiety about going deaf in my right ear, and I'm ending the year sick and full of anxiety about going blind in my left eye. Truly, truly a full circle experience we have on our hands here. So, if 2023 could have a motto, it would be something like,
Whoa, now. You got too much dip on your chip.
Hello, and welcome to my 2023 end of the year recap video. I am going to try to take a more low-key approach with this one, and those of you who have seen my videos before know how hard that's going to be for me. Anyway, I've got a lot to go through, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So we're already starting the year off on a little bit of shaky ground. My left eye was a little wonky. My hedgehog is being a little weird, and my 2006 Hyundai Elantra hasn't had an oil change in about a year. So, needless to say, the entire household is looking kind of dusty. However, on the literal first day of this year, I end up discovering the Black Plagues podcast via Smoke Joestar's channel, and they have been keeping me afloat this entire year. Check them out if you like, they're very funny. One of the biggest accomplishments I've made was finishing Chapter 18's thumbnails. Chapter 18 is a chapter I've been very excited about for a very long time, and I was very glad to be done planning. Let's head to February, shall we? February is actually quite uneventful, surprisingly. I had put leftovers to the side after finishing the Chapter 18 thumbnails because I wanted to go full in on working on this big Sonic video that I wanted to have written and mostly recorded by March. However, 2023 had other plans. But that's really it for February. Moving on. March rolls around and I'm tentatively excited about my appointment in which I get to finally see what's wrong with my left eye. However, in the most devious case of he's just like me for real, my hedgehog Kirishima suddenly passes of a neurological disease, and then 4 days later at my appointment, I find out that I have a massive brain tumor. Who needs time to grieve? Not me, apparently. And so, I have my first ever surgery, which is brain surgery. Really jumping into the deep end here. I won't go into it, but if you'd like to see more details, you can check out my 28 and Feeling Great video, which I made while I was healing, and I'm very proud of. And lastly, while trying to crack the code of sleeping sitting up post-surgery, I ended up discovering a lot of fight commentary YouTubers. They have also kept me afloat all year. April rolls around and it is, in retrospect, the most peaceful time I've had this year. It's mostly spent staying home with my mom in her cramped one-bedroom apartment, which her neighbors upstairs are incredibly loud. They stomped all the time. This will be important later on, but I thought I'd just put it out there now. But yes, I was staying in my hometown with my mom for the end of March until the end of April, where I was healing and doing physical therapy. In order to both strengthen my right hand and also make a memorial to Kirishima, I ended up creating my first successful ball-jointed dolls, a goal I've been working towards for maybe 5 or 6 years or more. Sad it had to happen under this context. However, I'm still very proud of them. And yes, I also made my first Sonic OCs during this process. See the previous line for how I feel about that. I finally turned 28 on the 26th of this month, and I ended up having 2 birthday parties. One which I put on at Korean barbecue with my friends, and one my mom surprised me with. I have not had a birthday party since I was 4. April is the month where I managed to put together my 28 and Feeling Great video, and for those of you who watched that, you'll know that I was really dreading turning 28. However, I'm here, I'm queer, and whether or not I'm filled with fear, you'll have to listen on to find out. Ellie finally got her oil change, and of course, as you usually do, I found out that was not the only thing wrong. But because I did not survive a spontaneous brain surgery just to die from brake failure, I went ahead and forked a bill to get her maintenance done. Thankfully, I had help from family. Lastly, I finally saw the Mario movie, which I absolutely adore, despite the fact that it gave me, a person who has grown up knowing this crazy-ass dragon turtle my entire life, some very weird feelings about Bowser, which I will not go into, but those of you who know. Moving on. May starts off strong as I finally healed and returned to full independence back in my own apartment, and eventually back to work. Look at that, I'm finally feeling like the main character of my own life for once. You love to see it. I spent many of my days hopeful and looking towards the future, and unfortunately many of my nights crying because of the friend that I lost. I finished working on Chapter 18 and excitedly slated it for release at the beginning of June. Feeling super confident about myself, I thought, hey, maybe I'll go out on the town, meet someone new who could get my back arching a little bit, if you know what I mean. A phrase which 2023 deeply misinterpreted, but I'll save that for later. The most stress I had during May was fighting tooth and nail to qualify for a better quality apartment down the street from me, but I ended up making it by the skin of my teeth, and I signed the lease for a move-in on August 20th. And lastly, after legitimately having a conversation with myself about whether or not it was too soon to use terms like brain rot, brain dump, etc. without worrying my family and friends, I put out my unhinged Mario recap video. I'm very proud of it. Now it's time to jump into June, or as I like to call it, the beginning of the endless summer. June, surprisingly, starts off relatively well. I picked up some very nice IKEA bookshelves, and as planned, posted the cover and page 1 of Leftovers Chapter 18 within the first 2 weeks. Every page afterwards, however, would see me fighting for my life, struggling every Tuesday to post. If you were wondering why I responded to less comments, here's why. After an unprecedented amount of stress, resulting from several muscles going back in causing headaches, work-related things, figuring out medication refills, and getting back to regular life, 2023 slid back into my DMs like a bad ex, and I had my first ever seizure on June 10th, which luckily my mom was there for, because I had no clue what to do during a seizure. It was all back-arching indeed, but the only new people I met were the paramedics loading me onto the truck for my first ever ambulance ride. This is not what I asked for, because I know so many of you are just so curious to know what my seizures are like. Here we go. To put it shortly, it is the equivalent of my brain having a blue screen. To put it in long terms, however, it is an extremely traumatic experience during which I'm forced to lay on my side while I'm waiting for my body to slowly lose control of its facilities. Whatever anxious thoughts I had before the seizure starts go on loop until the seizure ends. Usually, those thoughts are, am I going to die this time? I'm forced to sit and wait until the twisting begins, in which my body twists completely to the right side. I have no control over this, and then when I come out of it, I'm completely exhausted. Thank goodness this is the only time this is going to happen. We arrive at the ER, and they're quite frankly very unhelpful. This is what we learned. What I had may or may not have been a seizure, as there was no electrical misfiring noticed on my MRI. And in fact, the only way they would be able to tell for sure is if I spent 6 days in a sleep deprivation chamber. This so-called seizure could have been caused by regular epileptic triggers, such as lights or sounds, or it could be caused by extreme stressors, both physically and mentally. There is also a massive tumor scar on my brain from the tumor removal, and it may or may not ever fully heal. And lastly, I have to report to the Motor Vehicle Association that I had a seizure so that they can tell me whether I have to stop driving for 3 or 6 months. As someone who lives alone, that is very much not what I wanted to hear. Thankfully, Mom and I agreed that I would have to go home with her for another 3 months. However, I wanted to retain my independence and asked to bring my workstation. Mom agreed. I then proceeded to not work for another 6 weeks. Of course, with no medical answer at all, my mind did what it likes to do best, and I went headlong into a full month and a half long panic attack. Knock knock, who is that? It's the disassociation. I would like to take a second to list out the triggers developed from June 10th onward amongst both me and my mom. Moving my eyes left or right too fast, blinking too many times, turning my head left or right too far, holding it there too long, any kind of shakes or twitches, including shivering when cold, any headache at all, lights that are too bright, sounds too loud or sharp, forgetting my train of thought, not breathing deep enough, seeing other people twitch or shake, stumbling over words, which, might I add, developing that as a traumatic trigger as someone who has and has always had a lisp is utterly demonic. But that's not all. Mom hearing me making too much noise. Mom hearing me make no noise at all. Seeing me stare off into space. Me not responding to text for 25 minutes or more. The phrase, "Mom, can I tell you something?" as that's usually followed by news of another seizure. The smell of chocolate chip cookies, which may seem random, but Mom was making them the first night I had a seizure. Having too many thoughts. Having no thoughts at all. Too much energy before bedtime, etc. And if you're thinking, wow, that's everything, you see my problem. Now staying in my mom's tiny cramped one-bedroom apartment with the loud neighbors, I spent most of the summer wearing sunglasses and earplugs because dark rooms were too bright and an ant pissing on cotton was too loud. I ended up falling into a depression for most of June and the first part of July. I lost weight because I was afraid to do or feel anything lest I trigger another seizure. However, because I am a rat who is going to have rat feelings, I started handwriting a story which I often added to while I was laying in bed for hours at a time, and that's when encountering Encounters with the King was born. If you know, you know. Even the depths of hell cannot stop my Bauiji brain rot. By the beginning of July, I'm so exhausted and ready to just forget this traumatic shit ever happened that I bury it deep enough to where I won't be at risk of waking up in cold sweats thinking about a seizure for another 10 years. And then I had 11 more. I'll put the dates on the screen right now, so that way I don't have to bring them up individually when they happen, but you also know that they're just in the background running concurrently with the rest of my life. Like a Trojan you downloaded back in 2005 off a website you should have never been on. It's around the July 27th seizure where I realized perhaps this is actually my villain origin story, but by August 20th, I stopped in the kitchen one day, looked my mom deep in the eyes, and said, "I'm tired. Life is exhausting," which was a perfect encapsulation of how I felt at this point after having lived the summer in fear. Let's talk about intrusive thoughts, on how I have a lot of intrusive thoughts. Nothing too serious, just cute little shit like, what if mom is driving one day and I have a seizure and I accidentally grip the car door and roll out into the street where a truck comes and crushes my head, and so the brain surgery was all for nothing. These thoughts like to visit me very frequently, but it's a lot harder to deal with when half of your head is under maintenance. It was also through self-analyzing these intrusive thoughts that I realized I was basically talking myself into a seizure. And since I was able to deduce that my second episode in particular was caused by high anxiety, I got on anxiety medication for the first time in my life. Quite frankly, it's up there with the best fucking decisions I've ever made. My head is so quiet, it's actually kind of unnerving. Since the seizures were not going to stop, Mom and I decided it was best for me to move back home long term. And so we began traveling 3 hours up to my apartment every other weekend so we can pack my things. And by we, I mean my mom, because most of the weekends I was out of commission. This traveling schedule continued all summer. And since at this point we are living in Mom's 1-bedroom apartment where she has given me her bed and taken to sleeping on an air mattress in her own living room for 2 months, we immediately started looking for a 2-bedroom apartment. And speaking of apartments, you remember that apartment I fought for back in May. We'll just go ahead and cancel that lease. After my second 6 weeks off of work, I finally returned at the end of July, and quite honestly, it's just nice to be busy again. Also, I'm natural now. It's quite the look. And I actually have my own hair pick. I believe my official black card came in the mail a couple days later. August rolls in, and with it comes baby's first medical debt. But nobody has time for that because I'm still not done being obsessed with Charlie Day's voice as Luigi. And because of that, I decided to check out this Always Sunny in Philadelphia show I've heard so much about over the years. Always Sunny in Philadelphia is quite literally Intrusive Thoughts, the television show. It's very cathartic, and I absolutely love it. Also, yes, binging 16 seasons in 3 months is absolutely normal behavior. I will not hear otherwise. I have now learned about sugar, carbs, and their connection to seizures. And so, because I am just one big carb, I began cutting down on them, thus beginning my journey of losing weight, on purpose this time. After an entire summer of being afraid of the blue rat because I figured he would make me spaz again, I finally was able to check out season 2 of Sonic Prime. It was straight hands only, exactly the energy I needed. I made the life-changing decision of deciding to write all of Encounters with the King before posting. It's actually quite intoxicating, and a method I'm for sure going to be using for projects going forward. I, of course, after my August 20th seizure, admit to Mom that I'm tired, but in the same breath, I also promise that after the shit we've been through this year, this Christmas is going to be lit as fuck. And lastly, we finally figure out how to get my car back down to my hometown, since I still can't drive. September starts off incredibly strong, as my friends come over to my apartment for one last get-together before I leave my college town and move 3 hours away back to my hometown. And then September 8th is the fabled moving day, or rather the start of moving weekend, as we are literally combining 2 households into an apartment we've never even seen. Fortunately, this apartment is perfect. The neighbors are quiet, Mom and I each have our own space, and the lighting is phenomenal. I finally finished writing all 8 chapters of Encounters with the King and decided to go through with creating my chapter cover images. And most importantly, I finally stopped disassociating. What else can I say besides, it's great to finally feel like I'm in a place at a time again. October comes around and I've started finally posting encounters online. However, at this point, I've had so many seizures that I've stopped using up journal space to record them and instead just put a little blip on my calendar. I also had a pretty big revelation that included realizing that I'm not only dealing with my regular day-to-day anxiety, but also the added trauma. And so I upped my anxiety meds, and now I'm finally starting to reclaim my life and slowly implement more normalcy back into it. I created a vid explaining my Leftovers Chapter 18 creation process, and I'm, what? You guessed it, super proud of it. Following in the footsteps of upping my anxiety meds and figuring out a bit more about my trauma, I made this awesome as fuck motivational wall because regular posters just weren't doing it for me at this point. For Christmas, I wanted to get more Pokemon Scale World figures to build on my collection. However, instead I thought, hey, why don't I just make my own and use that money for something else? So I finally learned how to make a 120 scale based on some reference from the Pokemon Scale World website, and I began designing the first set of my Leftovers figures. Along the same vein, since I planned to make Christmas pretty big this year, I didn't want to spend so much money all at once, so I just went ahead and got my own presents first. This included the first camera I've ever bought for myself and a green screen for use in future projects. I also brought myself some Mario and Luigi dolls from Target, and looking at them makes me very happy. They're quite movie accurate actually. And with the end of the month comes Halloween, and with Halloween comes the release of the FNAF movie, Five Nights at Freddy's for those who don't know. And I absolutely, genuinely adore it for reasons I can't explain here because I don't have the time. Then for, quite honestly, the best surprise, the Dan and Phil Games channel returns for its first spooky week in 4 years. They would also go on to do their first Gaming Miss in 4 years. 2023 or not, I truly am feasting. November comes along, and unexpectedly, it's quite the packed month. I sculpted the 120 scale Leftovers figures using some new skills I learned through researching and watching other clay videos. These are the tiniest figures I've made since I was tiny myself, and I absolutely love them. Kiba's my favorite. I finally started editing my Sonic Frontiers playthroughs, a game which I played last November. And since I got a taste of finishing projects before posting, I will be following suit with this Let's Play. Thankfully, I've been well enough for a bit now where I can drown myself in media again. I started Our Flag Means Death Season 2, which for the most part, I was living for. But then I watched the finale of Season 2 and the finale of Attack on Titan in the same day. So, F's in the chat for the double disappointment. Holding true to my promise of this Christmas being lit, Mom and I got a Christmas tree and spent the whole day decorating. This is the first Christmas tree either of us have had since I was in the 5th grade. Since I'm an adult with money, I ordered my mom a ton of gifts, and because I'm not allowed to lift over 5 pounds, I became very good at lying about it. Ah yes, another package? I'm just ordering some lights for my green screen. If you could carry that in here, that would be great. Also, I'm just going to wrap those so our Christmas tree isn't naked and I have something to open up. It's really no big deal. Last Thanksgiving, I promised my mom that I would help her get back into gaming, so one of her presents was Super Mario Wonder, and ever since, we have started having gaming nights whenever free. Day 3 into Mario Wonder, and she asked me if there was a versus mode. Probably, but I would really appreciate you being on the sticks a whole week before you try to whoop my ass. I finally started conquering my biggest seizure anxiety of memory loss because, let's face it, I've always been a forgetful bitch, and I can't live like this. November 18th, I finally get my 6-month post-surgery checkup MRI, which would have happened in September had I not had an MRI following my seizure in June. I would also like to note that both my June MRI and my November MRI show that physically, I'm healing fantastically, which lends even more credence to the fact that these seizures are purely a mental stress issue. Lastly, on the docket for November, I had Thanksgiving with my mom's side of the family for the first time since 2019. It was amazing, and playing with my aunt's dog allowed me to see just how much Kirishima opened me up to affection. It was an incredibly healing experience. Ah yes, and that leads us straight into December. Immediately, I'm starting the month feeling stronger in body and mind. December 1st, I discover Link Click, a fire-ass Chinese anime, which immediately started patching up the wounds afflicted by Attack on Titan's timey-wimey shenanigans. Despite being a 23-episode speedrun through getting my feelings hurt, I highly recommend. I showed one of my friends my Leftovers figures, and she asked if I ever thought about 3D printing them. So, I fell down a deep research rabbit hole and learned how to 3D sculpt in Nomad Sculpt on my iPad in my free time. Because I'm not through getting my feelings hurt, I finally checked out Good Omens Season 2 at the behest of a good friend. While it healed the wounds left by Our Flag Means Death Season 2's lackluster ending, it then pulled a Link Click and had me feeling some type of way by the last episode. Still highly recommend. And finally, Let's Plays for both games Lethal Company and Help Wanted 2 have been keeping me warm as I readjust adjust to the weird winter weather of my hometown. And with a very peaceful December to close it out, thankfully, that is my 2023. So, what is my takeaway? Well, I started the year going blind in my left eye, then received surprise brain surgery as a solution, suffered through an unforgivably hellish summer, had 12 seizures in 6 months. As somebody who doesn't like taking meds, I am now on 3,900 milligrams a day. I have been out of work for 12 unpaid weeks. I have now basically returned to being independent, except I have a 40-hour job, and I miss the hell out of my hedgehog. But, on the other hand, my rigorous pattern of stress avoidance has led to me having the best work-life balance I've ever had. And that's not just with my day job, it's also with my personal project. I got to see the closing, continuation, and return of some of my favorite pieces of media. Yes, Attack on Titan included. Despite the execution of being conscious during all of my seizures being incredibly traumatic, I'm honestly thankful for the fact that 1, I don't have to worry about passing out randomly, and 2, I know exactly how my seizures play out, so I know how to approach avoiding them from now on. The connections amongst myself, my family, and friends are truly flourishing. I have quite frankly gotten some incredible fits off, and honestly, they've got me acting different. I've also fulfilled a ton of long-time goals, including having a wall-length bookshelf with all of my knickknacks and doodads. I've improved on a lot of my passions, including not just art, but also sculpting and video editing. Perhaps the biggest thing is that I don't have a fucking brain tumor anymore. That's pretty great. And lastly, I've absolutely come out of the year stronger and more hopeful than I started it. I definitely like to approach turmoil in my life with the goal of making it a teachable moment, and I have a real, I might be down, but I'm not out mentality most of the time. But the severity of this year's events really reminded me that sometimes it's okay to take a pause and acknowledge that you aren't okay. I still can't drive, as the longest I've gone without a seizure is 3 weeks currently, but I'm thankful to be in a place and with people who care enough to help me work through all of this. That said, because humor is how I cope, I hope you at least got some laughs or chuckles out of this video. And I hope your end of the year is going well. I'll be taking a mental break personally here soon, so I'll see you when I see you. Bakara, signing out.